This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, this honorable chamber was in Standing Finance Committee. We shall return to Standing Finance Committee.
Standing Finance Committee is resumed. Honourable Minister, I would just want to pose a quick question before honourable members proceed. We have spent, back in the year 2020, we have spent some funds on the COVID facility at Harrison's Point in St. Lucie, a wonderful facility. I had the opportunity to tour it, very much state of the art, so to speak. And at the back end of COVID, I believe, hopefully, we have a lovely facility which I am sure can be of some great and good use to this country. I want to find out, and I'm sure the rest of Barbados would want to find out as well, what are the plans for use of that facility?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I must tell you that it is still being used. There's still patients with COVID who are being housed there. And so there is still being used for COVID patients. And we have one or two, as was mentioned earlier, some persons who had COVID, who have gotten over COVID, but are still there, unfortunately. You are correct, it is a wonderful facility, and we are obviously looking at how we can use it. We believe it should be a health facility going forward. The decision is, will it be taken over, will it be...
Honourable Minister, members have indicated not hearing you well, so you can speak more into the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Certainly.
As I was saying, there are still patients being housed there. In addition to those patients, there's some who have got over COVID who are still there. This is a matter we discussed earlier today. You are correct. Millions were spent there. It is a fantastic facility. And it is, I believe government believes it should be used as a health facility. As to if it will be private sector or public sector, that determination is still to be made. I know that the executive chair of the hospital has been very much involved in these processes, and I'll ask her to speak to address your question.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. We have been in discussion with a number of...
Would you kindly...
Sorry, apologies. Juliette Bino, Sutherland Executive Chairman, Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Thank you for the question. We've been in discussions with a number of agencies in the tourism sector, as well as the Ministry of Housing and land surveys and other sub-agencies about the use of the facility in the medium to long term. As I understand it from a policy perspective, as our Minister Walcott has indicated, decisions will be made about the long-term use of the facility and for health or health tourism or other related industry. In the interim, we recognize that having invested in an institution, the danger exists that if you do not utilize it, that you could have a situation where it begins to run to ruin because the lack of use of any healthcare facility actually creates that danger. As a hospital, we have put forward in our estimates that we can assist both the situation in A&E and improve the quality of care in certain areas by using it in the immediate to short term for areas of the hospital. A particular need has arisen, not just at the hospital, but across the health system for palliative care. Our Department of Oncology, Cardiology indicate that there are patients in the hospital for whom treatment modalities have come to an end and they're now in need of palliation. Basically, that is treatment to manage end of life and have persons have a quality end of life. And so many of those patients wind up being in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital on wards, which is less than ideal in terms of the end of life situation. So we've put forward proposals for use of the facility for palliative care, particularly in the area of oncology and in the area of heart disease and other ailments. We also recognize that there are patients, again, in the hospital who, after having orthopedic or other injuries, require long-term rehabilitation. Rehabilitation that is both for surgical interventions as well as for those who have respiratory ailments that need long-term interventions. The opportunity exists to co-locate at that facility, therefore, 38 beds for COVID, which we're currently using, and to utilize the other facilities as an immediate intervention to release beds at QEH and provide patients who are at their end stage of their disease, who need more acute rehab facilities with services at Harrison's Point.
Thank you. As I said, the decision has not been yet made.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I pose the two short questions which I have, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the Ministry of Health and Wellness for the partnership in health they have shared with the Ministry of Education over this long time. Whether it has been helping us to manage the school environment during the COVID pandemic, whether it has been the emergency health care given to students in crisis situations on an incident-by-incident basis, whether it has been the school nutrition policy, which we co-launched just a couple weeks ago, or whether it is the mental health awareness in schools, which is, I imagine, is going to be as important a program for the students as it will be for the teachers and the principals who themselves have been impacted in significant ways. And so as I asked my first question, I just wanted to say thank you. The Polyclinic network is an important part of the primary care effort in community and near community that we have. Now, I know that we want to make sure that there's quality care that is accessible to those coming to the polyclinics. We want to make sure that the services are appropriately expanded. I heard the minister speak earlier that some of the services, including those for mental health, will be expanded through the additional resources that will be there. I also believe that the facilities in which this care and these services are delivered ought to have a significant amount of upgrade and maintenance on an ongoing basis. And this is the point of my question, and I'm just asking the minister and the team, what is being put in place in this coming year to help improve the facilities, particularly at the polyclinics? I speak for the people of St. Philip West, particularly at 6 Roads, where there has been significant challenges with regards to the state of that facility. And while I don't wish to be parochial in this regard, though these are the people who sent me here, I wondered what, from a general perspective, what is being done to assist in upgrading and maintaining our polyclinics at a standard where health is a part of the building as well as a part of the service.
Thank you, Honourable Member. You are correct. It's 9 polyclinics, and you will appreciate the most modern is probably the one in St. John, the David Thompson. Yeah. And I must tell you that even that one, we've had requests, we've had issues, so we've had issues as to do to maintenance and issues with environmental conditions for the staff. So the problem is noted. It occurs at all of our polyclinics. And every year, I believe the PS would bear me out on this, we are shuffling in the resources assigned to individual polyclinics, but also to the technical management unit to do various repairs and projects, capital projects on some of these polyclinics. But it's always a problem of funds and spreading the funds. I know you said you didn't want to be parochial, but 6 Rose Polyclinic is one that has been having a fair amount of problems recently, and we have been trying and allocating funds for that. Perhaps I may ask Dr. Cumberbatch to speak, who is the Senior Medical Officer of Health South, as to some of the conditions and what is being done there.
Thank you, Minister. Ingrid Cumberbatch, Senior Medical Officer of Health South, and with responsibility for the polyclinics. As the Minister so correctly said, the St. Philip Polyclinic is undergoing a lot of renovations at this point of time. We know it's been disruptive to the catchment members there. We know that. But we're hoping that the renovations that, when they're completed, will be lend to a better experience for those persons who seek service at that facility. The services that have been disrupted at that polyclinic include the dental services. It includes some of the antenatal care and child health, but they're trying to maintain these services in other areas. But we know that historically we've had a lot of issues in terms of environmental issues at that facility, which have been very disruptive, not only to staff, but also to the clients. So that is why we're looking to try to upgrade that facility. In terms of the other polyclinics, we've been having incremental renovations, and the challenges, of course, is, as Minister has said, financial. For example, the Winston Scott Polyclinic is undergoing a painting. You know, everybody's familiar with that facility because that is where a 24-hour service is being administered from. And we know the state of that building, and they're now undergoing, we have funds, so we started a painting process for that facility, which has started today, actually. And hopefully, the whole environs for that facility would be improved for the catchment area there. This is an incremental and staged process. So we're trying to do these polyclinics in terms of upgrading the facilities incrementally. But as Minister said, the financial constraints are real, and we have to decide what we are and what we can't do at this point in time. The St. Thomas Outpatient Clinic, we have spoken of that already, and that is earmarked to be upgraded. We have upgraded the St. Joseph and the St. Andrew Outpatient Clinics in the past 2021, and those facilities are part of the plan that we would have had for the polyclinic system in terms of renovating. So that is where we are at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask my second question?
Proceed.
My second question relates specifically to surgeries. Now, I have been receiving at my constituency office a number of persons from my constituency who have been waiting for years for certain types of surgeries. And the question is, I know that I heard earlier the minister speak about the improvements that have already been made in terms of reducing the waiting times and executing actual surgeries. But this still remains an issue, and I'm very interested in hearing what is the ministry and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital doing to be able to even further improve, in particular, the kinds of concerns that are coming to my constituency office on an ongoing basis are those related to cataracts, those related to joint surgeries, and those related to feminine, female, gynecological, and other types of surgeries.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I did touch on this earlier, and we are making, we have plans, we've started making progress. You mentioned, I heard you mentioned 3 types of surgery. The cataracts, there was a backlog, and we're working assiduously to deal with that. And I'll let Minister Brown speak on it. You spoke of the gynae surgery. And I mentioned earlier on that we have 7 theaters, and by the end of this year, we're hoping to have 9 theaters available. One of those is would be one in Obs and Gynae. They have 2 theaters, but one is functional now. We're trying to get the other one functional so that mechanizing the issues we have there. And certainly in general surgery, there are a number of improvements. And I mentioned some, and I'm going to ask Minister Brown to speak to that, and perhaps they did. Sorry, Dr. Greenwich, the COO, to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Minister, for the comment and questions. You are indeed correct. There have been delays over the last several years, I dare say, in several of the surgeries, including what you have mentioned. I will go through them one by one. The factors really lie in the fact that all of the theaters were not functioning. And I must say that during the COVID period, the theaters for obstetrics and gynecology were used for particularly COVID cases, general cases, not necessarily gynae. So you would appreciate the backlog there. Apart from that, the cataract surgeries, yes, there was a backlog over several years. The last numbers we had were close to 500 in backlog, but I'm pleased to say that by now, I think we have covered that number, or almost covered that number. So the drive now is to see the current cases that are coming in and to see if we can access any further of the backlog, because we recognize that there are still some people who have said that they were on the waiting list and were not addressed. I want to put a point here that 1 or 2 of the cases that we heard publicly, when I checked myself, they were not actually on the list for cataract surgery and were being treated otherwise. The gynecological surgeries, the backlog, and most people speak of fibroids, but it's important here to say that the gynecological obstetric theater surgery list people are familiar with fibroids, and almost every female that I've ever spoken to had fibroids that knew that they had fibroids. So that is why it's one of the more common gynecological surgeries. There are some that come with greater priority cancer surgeries and so on, but we do appreciate the backlog, and one of the reasons being access to theaters. The last I heard, the fibroid surgeries were backed up to about, I think, 8 months, but we're working on that. But I want to hasten to say that the percentages for obstetrics and gynecology, they have a good rate of 82% of their surgeries being performed, with only 18% being canceled for whatever reason. Sometimes the reasons are unavoidable. Either the patient is not prepped enough for surgery, for other reasons, blood pressures, blood sugars may be high, whatever. But we're looking into that. The things that we've instituted or are about to institute, we've already spoken about the backlog due to cancellation of surgeries. We found that one of the reasons was the late on-time start. The Chief Operations Officer will tell you a little more about that. But we've managed to improve that greatly so that surgeries have been started on time. Hence, you get more into the day of surgeries. That is one of the pluses that we have put in place. We also have found that with the launch of the pre-anesthetic clinic, where patients are assessed before surgery, Along the lines of medical things that that doctors need to check before to give the okay for surgery, that has been instituted, and it has lended greatly to improvement in the operating, the cancellation of surgeries. The hiring of nurses from Ghana added to the complement of nurses in the operating theater, so we're seeing greater successes there. And we're hoping, as the minister said, to have at least 9 out of 12 theaters operational. Bearing in mind that the Lions Eye Care Center, they have 3 theaters that are dependent on the repair of the roof and ceilings to have those surgeries started assiduously. Despite the fact that we overcame the cataracts, we still need dedicated surgeries for ophthalmology, which include other surgeries. The joint care, because joint replacement surgeries, that is also something that has been in the media quite a lot over the last few months. After 10 years, I'm happy to say that we did a launch. We started them back in November and December. The last case being on the 12th of December, and as you know, the date for the cyber attack happened to be the 13th of December. And how it works in theater in terms of joint replacement surgeries, the Honourable surgeon beside me can correct me, but that involves a lot of x-rays and so on happening at the same time as the surgeries. So with that, there were problems actually uploading the x-ray results so that the doctor who's doing the surgery can see what is happening to put the appropriate instruments in place and so on, joint replacements. So we're hoping to restart the joint replacements come April. Somebody spoke earlier about the costs, the attendant costs of that, but I can say that we have managed to get a deal on consignment so that we only pay for what we used. So they're ordered particularly for cases rather than or the whole set that we pay for and then, nothing happens there. So there are steps being taken. The nursing complement is one, the doctors, the on-time surgeries. We would like to extend the theater times, but that is incumbent, and I think the minister spoke on that, so that we can have a more productive day of surgeries going longer. But at this point, until I remember more, I will hand it over to the Chief Operations Officer, Dr. Christine Greenidge. That is a fact. There's a lot in my head. Dr. Greenidge.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to address the utilization of I'm Dr. Christine Greenidge. I'm the Chief Operations Officer. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to just share the success, I will say, especially in the last year of the utilization of our operating theaters. At the beginning of 2022, I started my position February of 2022. I did a deep dive into the utilization of our OT service and our surgical services. At that time, we were doing approximately between 75 to 78 cases, surgical procedures of all different types per week. For the size facility at QOH, we should be doing at least 125 to 130 cases per week. So that was number one. The second thing is looking at the on-time start. On-time start in the OT consists of, our on-time start is 8 a.m. So if we don't start with that patient in that room at 8 a.m., it backs up every scheduled case for the end of the day. So what I found is that patients were pretty much in the holding area. Nursing staff was pretty much on board, but we had a problem with the tardiness of many of our surgeons. So 8 o'clock case fell into 9:30, 10 a.m. type of start. So we fixed that. We had conversations. I had the data to show the arrival time of our patients, our staff, our surgeons, and our anesthesiologists. So that helped brought, I thought, awareness to the necessity of really utilizing on time as the metric so that we can complete all cases scheduled in that particular day of surgery. The other factors is that in terms of cancellation, we were hovering around 35%, near 40% of canceled cases per week. That figure now in 1 year is down to about 22% overall, regardless of the type of surgery service. The other thing, it was factors related to the complement of nursing staff that we fixed. in terms of our recruit from Cuba as well as from Ghana. So nursing staff is on board. And then we look at the last case of the scheduled day, typically around 4:30, and realize that there's opportunity to expand that surgical day at least to 6, 7 o'clock so we can accommodate more cases. The other factor was looking at surgery 7 days a week, inclusive of Saturdays and Sunday. Why not? There are a lot of patients, for example, private patients will love to come on a Saturday, especially same-day surgery, and go home. So then we look at the complement of staff around anesthesiology and their working hours to see what we can do to further extend having that anesthesiology on board. The success, I think, in surgeries, the success of cataracts, again, working with an ophthalmologist, looking really at what was needed, and them committing to their own metric, which from June to December, with a number working of 470, the team of ophthalmologists decided that they will try to do 90 to 95 cases per week to clear that immediate backlog. We did 90%. Per month. And we cleared that backlog in December with a 90% completion rate. Factors that affected the 100%, the month of August of 2022, we had some AC issues, air conditioning issues in the OT, and of course we could not proceed because the rooms have to be a certain temperature. Orthopedics, I think both ministers mentioned, critical conversations with our team, understand that 10 years of not having these types of surgeries really was unacceptable. And working now with them to, I really got to compliment our CEO for really bargaining hard with one of our vendors to get the consignment contract. It made the difference in terms of us having on hand the equipment to be able to be successful in these surgeries.
Thank you. So going forward, Honourable Member, we are going to bring back 2 additional theaters back into service. We have recruited additional nurses. We are going to extend the hours of surgery, hopefully from 8 to 6. Dr. Greenwich forgot we'll need additional manpower. We have requested, we hope this year to get additional registrars, both in surgery and anesthesiology, because obviously if you're doing longer hours, we need anesthetists to be there to do these cases. And in addition, as part of the CapEx, we are getting additional surgical instruments to ensure that we can do this. Thank you.
I'm encouraged that my constituents their situations will be addressed sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have just 2 questions. One is more parochial and relates to the Morrisby Polyclinic. They've been, and I've been asked directly to raise the matter in this forum. The issue really relates to the access to dental services in the north, and the need for persons who need those dental services to have to go to the south when they used to be provided in the north. And the question is there any plan to have those services again provided in the north? Let me, not to soften the question, but just to indicate that in the north at Morrisby, we are accustomed to working very closely with the Polyclinic. So we provide things like television sets and benches and the sign that is outside the Polyclinic we have provided. So we have a very good working relationship. But I sense that the persons who administer the Polyclinic maybe would also want, along with my constituents, those who work there may also have an interest in me raising the matter of dental services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I mentioned dental services earlier, and it is an area where we are having problems. The Morris Bayer, you have 2 chairs. You have one is waiting on a motherboard. But that is not our main issue. Our main issue is the staffing, and I'm going to go through it. We have available currently overall positions for 1 senior dental officer, 2 dental officers part-time, 3 dental officers, and I'm going to go through this. Senior dental officer, a post not filled. 3 posts of dental officer, we have 2 filled. 3 dental officers part-time, 3 posts, none filled, 3 filled. Then 4 auxiliary dental officers, we have 13 posts, 6 filled, 4 of these 6 are working. 5 posts of 15 dental assistants, we have number of posts filled 5, we have number of posts filled 10, 9 of these persons are working. So in other words, if I looked at it, if I tallied it, we had 36 posts, and we have 21 filled, but 17 persons out of this 21 working. And we're intending to carry out a service across 9 polyclinics. And obviously, this is an area where we're working assiduously to address, not only in terms of the parts that are required, but also in terms of staffing. And I'm going to ask Dr. Ingrid Cumberbatch to speak further on this matter. Thank you.
Dr. Ingrid Cumberbatch, Senior Medical Officer. As Minister would have so rightly said, and I can say in my estimation, for about the past 10 years, dental services being delivered by the Ministry of Health has been challenged. And over the past 5 years, and certainly exacerbated in 2020, 2021 during the COVID pandemic, the challenges to the dental services have gotten significantly worse. Now, what has caused these challenges? In the beginning, it was a little about equipment, but then the main and significant challenge became about human resources and the lack of human resources, and particularly a category of staff which is called the auxiliary dental officer. This category of staff is important because they're the persons that would do the majority of the screening when you bring the children to the polyclinic in order to do an initial assessment and also to go into the community and into the schools to screen the children's teeth. Now, Minister would have said that they have 13 posts for the auxiliary dental officer, of which only 6 is filled and 4 are currently working. And I can say to you that of these 4 persons, 2 of them are due for retirement within the next 2 to 3 years. The other 2 are due to retirement in about 10 to 12 years. But the other significant thing about this post is that the training for the persons who are usually in this post is no longer available, it's obsolete. So the auxiliary dental officer, which is the post that is there, we have no one to fill it because there's no one to train to putting it. So the Ministry of Health now has to work to see how we can get these persons who are auxiliary dental officers into the new era, which is a dental therapist hygienist. And this is a category of staff that has to undergo a 4-year training degree. The original auxiliary dental officer had a 30-month certificate, which was done by UTEC in Jamaica. But they have converted that program into what I call the dental therapist hygienist. The benefit of the dental therapist hygienist is also one where that person is not only able to do the function of the auxiliary dental officer, but they have the ability to do additional functions, hygiene therapy, and things that we don't do at present in the polyclinics. Because right now, our polyclinic adult dental care is only focused on extractions for adults. The hygienist will be able to do more dental procedures, particularly for those persons who have NCDs, and carry us into the future and where we would want to go in terms of what WHO and other international health practices are for dental clinic. So what we have done in the Ministry of Health at this point in time, and this is, I need you all to understand, this is just a temporary stopgap measure, is that we're asking for 5 additional sessional dentists in order to come into the system to help to provide the staff for the system. Because if we have those dentists, then we can get a service back up at Morris Bayer with the 1 chair that is available that can work, right? And we will be able to provide services at least maybe 5 to 6 polyclinics. I say 5 to 6 because before we were able to provide services at the St. Philip Polyclinic initially in 2022, but because of the renovations there, those dental services were disrupted, as the Honourable Member would have stated previously. So if you're able to complete the renovations, then we'll be able to get polyclinic dental services back up and running at about 6 polyclinics. The other challenges in terms of the other 3 polyclinics would be related to the equipment issues. And you would have heard already about motherboards being needed at Morris Bayer, but there's also need for a motherboard at the Eunice Gibson Polyclinic and the Brantford Tate Polyclinic, which is another area where there's a huge need for dental services, is that they need to have completion of drainage for the, what is that? What I'm looking for, a central pump, a central vacuum system that they need to work with the dental process. The other clinic that will be affected is the Randall Phillips Polyclinic, where the assembling and parts required for that chair need interface from, and parts from overseas, which you're having challenges with getting. But the main thing I want to stress here is the fact that the human resources are where the major challenge are. And the conversion of that auxiliary dental officer to the dental therapist hygienist is important at this point in time. I'll stop there.
Thank you, PS.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon again. Janet Phillips, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I won't be very long. The short-term measure that we've put in place is to ask the Ministry of Public Service to do a conversion where we use the post of dental officer and we get instead sessional dentists so that they will come in, persons from the private sector will come in and fill those vacancies on a short-term basis until we develop the training plan to get persons trained in Jamaica as hygienists, which is the training that's being offered now since the training for auxiliary dental officers is no longer available. So we're just waiting to get the concurrence to the Ministry of Public Service, then we can do the recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The concern, and thanks for the explanation and for the identifying the measures. The concern impacts the older people, as all of us know, but what came to my mind just now, and maybe I say this in an effort to help lobby for you with the Ministry of Public Service, to say that growing up, many of us only ever heard about or saw a dentist through, well, we used to call it then the health center. We had a health center in Spitestown. We weren't sophisticated then with a polyclinic. But that was a child's exposure to the dentist. And if we don't catch the children, we can have a lot more extractions and other things when they become adults. The second question I have has to do, second and final really, to do with psychological intervention with respect to persons who have suffered traumatic injury. Now this comes from a reflection on sitting with a family where a member lost a limb in violent circumstances. And I am concerned, maybe because of my older daughter who is into mental health advocacy, so I'm learning a bit from her, well, learn a lot from her. I was concerned in speaking to the family and to the young man that while there is good attention paid to the physical, stopping the blood flow the blood loss and all the other things that you physicians know, I began to get a little bit concerned that the psychological component may not have been addressed in the same way. And I'm wondering, I don't know if that is true or not, that's just based on the conversation, but I'm wondering if there is, given the increased recognition of the importance of addressing mental health issues, if there will be, or if there is already, some process, some system, some structure within our healthcare system that addresses the psychology while addressing the physical.
Thank you, Minister. As you were speaking, I was thinking back, and I remember years ago, I was in a different place, in a different role, that when unfortunately you had to do amputations, that in addition to physio, there was some counseling. I'm not certain if this still obtains. I'm not certain. Perhaps the executive chair could speak to it. But also, I mean, we spoke earlier, I don't know if you were here, about psychological first aid and how the ministry is going to be pushing this into society. But perhaps I'll ask Juliet, Mr. Sutherland, to speak to it, sorry. And after that, perhaps I'll ask Dr. McLachlan to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet Bino, Sutherland, Executive Chairman. I may need some assistance from Dr. Williams, but Honourable Member for St. Peter, it's an absolutely astute observation that in addition to treating with the trauma, immediate trauma, and then the recovery and rehabilitation, which is generally focused on the physical and clinical needs, that we recognize that there is a significant gap in the treatment of the individual and then also of the family, because the family is going to have to make the adaptation also. As part of our estimates, we recognize that psychiatry, psychology is an area of our hospital services that needed to be built out, not just in this area for what we call liaison psychiatry or this area of psychological support to individuals and to families, also because of the increasing number of children who are affected by. So we have included in our estimates for psychologists. I'm going to let Shani amplify a little bit because it is definitely a gap area, and you've hit on something that we are investing in as an institution, and I think Shani's leadership has been critical in this regard.
Shani Williams, Acting Director of Medical Services. Yes, we've recognized that mental health support is needed not only for the patients, but also for our staff, especially having navigated the last 2-3 years of this pandemic. And so one of the things we would ask for is support as it relates to a clinical psychologist as part of our team, not only in the psychology department, the Department of Psychiatry, we needed support in the Department of Pediatrics, as well as the Rehabilitation Department. Unfortunately, at this time, we only have 2 sessional psychologists, and their focus mainly is on the suspect child abuse and neglect service that we offer through the Pediatric Department. Persons who, as you mentioned, cases with major life-altering events and traumatic injuries and so on, we try to rely on the services of our multidisciplinary team, so the clinicians themselves and surgeons offer some level of support where possible alongside the nurses. And in addition, the rehabilitation, occupational therapists and other rehabilitation support specialists will try to offer some support. We recognize that there's a gap where that is concerned, and that is why we're asking for the additional resources.
Thank you, Shannon. The only thing I wanted to add, Minister, with your permission, is that some areas of our hospital care, we recognize we have to have partnership with civil society. And this is an area that we are increasingly looking to partner with NGOs, the amputation group, any mental health expertise, because the state cannot do it alone in many instances. So we have an excellent model with Cancer Support Services, who works directly with C12 and our oncology cancer patients, which shows the extent to which, when we partner directly, make referrals for support for our patients, that we get it redounds to the benefit of how they deal with and cope with cancers and other illnesses. And we recognize that this also will be an area that we're going to be seeking civil society partnerships to be able to strengthen the resources available to our patients and to our staff by extension.
Thank you very much. And what I can do as, in response to that, as Minister with some responsibility for engaging with civil society, because we do have civil society partners who are those who are trained properly trained, appropriately trained, who are anxious to partner with government in providing services from the faith-based organizations. They use the term tithing time, so giving back. And it is something that I will share with them, an area of need. And depending on the interests, then I can put them into contact with the QEH. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Peter. Honourable Member for St. John.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. My questions are going to revolve around the David Thompson complex. Statement first, the AC at that facility is not working well for a number of months now. It's impacting both staff and the clients who go there. Minister, my first question to you is in relation to the gym at that facility. I've been asking for years now to have that particular gym open. Still no word on it. I'm prepared to have the National Sports Council work in partnership with you if that is possible. Can you give an update on the status of the gym?
Thank you, Honourable Member. First of all, as it relates to the air conditioning matter, I'll ask Dr. Cumberbatch to speak to that. As in relation to the gym, I believe I'll ask the Minister Brown to speak to that, and the PS, sorry, to speak to that, because I believe there is a proposal from an entity that you're familiar with, which is expressing an interest in working on the gym, but it has not yet reached me. Dr. Cumberbatch.
Ingrid Cumberbatch, Senior Medical Officer of Health. Honourable Minister, in relation to your first question, in terms of the AC and the AC not working, that has been a problem not only this year, but it has been a problem almost from the inception of that facility being completed. We've been having ongoing challenges with the central air. And what the Ministry of Health has been seeking to do is that they are putting in split systems incrementally in order to address that problem. So yes, we are aware that there is a problem with the central air that is affecting both the staff and clients, but we are seeking to address it incrementally through the putting of the split systems. And that work has been commenced since last year. That's one. I think the other part of your question was respect to the gym. Yeah, I believe that PS will speak to the gym. Thank you.
PS will speak to the gym.
Janet Phillips, Permanent Secretary. Before I speak on the issue of the gym, if I could add in a bit of context in relation to the central air system. It is really, really expensive to fix, and right now we don't have the fiscal space to do so, and therefore we're going to the separate units to give comfort while we can so that we can stay within our budget. Secondly, in relation to the gym, we do have in office a proposal with respect to the National Sports Council. Taking over the management of the gym is supposed to be an arrangement between, MOU between ministry as well as the National Sports Council, but because Minister has not had sight of it yet, we are still looking at it at the lower level. I didn't want to go into details, but he gave me permission to speak, so it is on the table to be considered.
Thank you. Maybe you can just pass it over to your right so the minister can see it. Chair, the other questions I'll ask both together. There's a situation where I have a lot of elderly folks in St. John that are going to the Polyclinic. It would be good if on mornings that whoever is opening the facility can allow them to come inside and sit if that is not a major issue, because there's nowhere outside for them, and it's like 20, 30 persons every day that you will see on the outside, and people are walking around on the inside. My last question, I know there was a move at some point in time to make the facilities there a 24-hour facility. Can there be any update as it relates to that?
As relating to the matter of persons going earlier, it is something that could be considered, but bearing in mind that early for some elderly people it could be 6 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know that we could ask an officer to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. So there could be some flexibility. Regarding the extended hours at the Polyclinic, I'm not certain that this ever really happened, did it? I don't believe it ever started. And so perhaps it was approved in cabinet, but I don't, from what I'm seeing, it never started. And we're looking to do that, but I'm not sure where some of the staff is now. Some of the staff apparently have been deployed. So I'm not certain, but it's something that I'm looking at. It was approved in cabinet. I don't think it was ever implemented. I guess COVID came right after that, and staff were diverted. So it is something that we are looking at.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. John. Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. I want to begin by sincerely thanking this team, the Ministry of Health and all of the other entities that worked so hard with us during COVID. It could not have been easy. And know that the bulk of the weight is off. And I thought you were having an easier time. I now realize that you don't have enough staff, you don't have enough equipment, so I have to thank you again. I really appreciated the answers that were given in relation to the issue of the surgeries, because that is a major problem for some of my people in St. James South, where surgeries are constantly delayed. And in some cases, people are unable to go to work until they get the surgery, and that complicates their financial position during this very difficult period of COVID. I will not comment on the fact that there's no polyclinic in St. James. I know you can't do anything about it. We will try to live with it as best we can. But let me remind you that there are 23,000 people who live in that parish, just to let you know. I want to go back to the issue of mental stress. One of the reasons for that is that I was confronted with a person, strong, vibrant, young person. But the pressures of COVID, of pending unemployment, of the bills piled up and all coming in within a week, led this person to the place where they were in such despair. They wanted to call the psychiatric hospital to see if they could get some help because they felt they were sinking. They could not understand where their emotional strength had gone to. And this is multiplied many, many times over in my constituency. I'm sure everybody here can tell you of the stress and the helplessness that they don't have a solution, and we don't have the resources to really respond to it. And I took a quick look at what they say on the world stage about those mental pressures and the anxiety and the increased risk of depression and despair. And another statistic that came up was the fact that 45% of women experienced violence in their homes during the COVID period. So there was an added stress. My concern then goes to our children, because when you have those mental pressures bearing down on the heads of the home, it leaks down to the children. It affects the relationships, the emotional relationships in the house. And the end result is that our children lose twice. They lost in terms of their schooling, but now find themselves in an at-risk environment, an environment that is sharp and stressful with parents who are stressed out. And so it becomes unsafe for them. So I was very happy to hear the response earlier to the fact that there are a number of things that you are planning to do in order to help in terms of the reform, the legislation, trying to reorganize your 3 psychiatrists and 6
Honourable member,
psychologists.
you may want to pose your question.
I will. I just want to give them where I'm coming from. The mass education, etc. My understanding, based on all that I have heard, and with the limitations that you have on resources, it will take a little time before you can actually roll this out to have an effect. The challenge is that there are a number of people suffering now. I want to know if there is a possibility for a quick, short-term approach. You have pastors and people in churches who've been trained in counseling. You have lots of people who study psychology but may not have a job in that area. There are people who've been trained in mentorship. I am just wondering if it is at all possible for us to mobilize those persons in a volunteer effort to help provide some outlet that we can use in the homes and in the schools, etc., to help relieve the stress of that mental pressure.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It speaks to one of our plans that maybe have been involved in training persons in psychological first aid, and certainly the recommendation that you made to utilize the faith-based institutions and other entities is welcome. I would ask Mr. Leacock to speak to this.
Good afternoon. David Leacock, Director, Psychiatric Hospital. As Minister would have outlined, during the last financial year, we would have trained 160 persons in psychological first aid that address fire service personnel, police, DEO representatives, as well as some persons from churches and the schools. This year, we're hoping to double that number as far as training in that area is concerned to capture a wider cross-section of persons in the society. Relative to the issue of how do we in turn engage NGOs or FBOs, we have, over the last year, been working to develop an actual guideline to share with churches as it relates to how they in turn can identify mental health issues and how they can serve as resource persons for those persons as well. So we're hoping that within the next 3 months to actually send that out to the churches and hopefully have those persons come on board as well.
Thank you very much. 3 months. I'm counting. The other area of concern is the area of the inclusion of the diaspora and the returning nationals. In my constituency, I have a fairly large population of persons who are returning nationals and skilled people. A lot of them have been in nursing or some form of medical training. And from time to time, they would ask that they would like to be included in some of what you want to do. And so I just wanted to find out if you have a program where we can include them because they want to have an opportunity to give back to Barbados. They're home all day, you know, needing something stimulating to do. They don't want to do something every day of the week. They would not mind giving a few hours.
Thank you. It's an excellent question, Honourable Member. And we don't have a program in place, but as you speak, Dr. Greenwich, the CEO of the QH, is a returning national. And I'm sure she could be a focal point for something like this. I'll ask her for her thoughts.
Christine Greenwich, Chief Operation Officer, born and raised in the wonderful parish of St. Philip, left the island of Barbados at the age of 9 and retired last year out of New York City Health and Hospital Corporation. It was always my dream to come back to where I was born, to give back. And so that was my impetus for my early retirement out of that system. I think, though, in returning here as someone, I left at a very young age, but I can tell you that my family and friends in New York said to me, "Why are you going back?" And my response was, why not? I have something to give, and I want to give. But I think, though, that many people fear not being accepted. And I think over the years, traditionally, in our country, that was the experience of many. I found the experience very engaging. I've heard our Prime Minister, I've attended many of our forums years ago in Brooklyn, in New York, whenever she came up, and I can tell you that she always made the appeal. And in 2019, I really got more of that from her when I attended that town hall. But it's the whole concept of the fear of not being accepted. And you know, that old saying that I heard as a child, you know, they're coming back here to tell me what to do. And not recognizing the plethora of opportunity and skill sets and competencies that people are willing to work and give back. So I was recently approached, I want to make sure I have the right name, but one of the ministers called and had a contact with someone out of South Carolina who wanted to come back. And this person worked in the community in health. And I'm in conversation with her, partnering her with Monique Edwards and members of the Transition to Care program to get whatever they can give freely. This is not a job for me. This is a passion. You know, and the hip thing was part of my experience as a 7-year-old child with my grandmother in St. Philip and St. Martin's. This is her friend, Miss Ida, I remember, my hip. And I mocked her saying my hip, realizing now that she needed a hip replacement and the pain that she probably went through. So I think that if we send the message that here's your home, welcome back home, we want you. You're not an outsider. You know, I'm not an outsider. I may have a different accent, but I'm not. I know my culture, I know my people. So I think if we send a strong message, I'm doing my bit. I have lots of family recently retired. I've said, come down for 3 months. You know, you're a nutritionist, you're a physical therapist, you're a respiratory therapist. What are you retiring doing? So I think that is a mindset shift at both ends. We got to get out of, you know, them coming back here to tell me what to do type of thing, and recognize that the opportunity to give back. Thank you.
Minister, sorry, with your permission, I just wanted to add that at QEH, we do have a structured volunteer program that people can enter. Because it is a health facility, we want to ensure that, you know, there's certain processes, people have certain vaccinations, et cetera. But I wanted to say that we actively welcome volunteers. During COVID, we would have had people come from New York State and across the Eastern Seaboard to participate, retired, as well as active nurses coming. So we do have an open arm policy to members of the diaspora, both in terms of recruitment for positions, and we do have vacancies, some vacancies that we've not been able to fill for audiologists, for radiographers. I can continue for areas. Yes, the salaries will not be the same as salaries in other parts of the world, but but what we do have is the fact that the opportunities are in Barbados, where the cost of living is lower, and where it's an opportunity, as Dr. Greenidge is saying, to give back. So we do have employment opportunities, which we can structure around part-time and other kinds of engagements, as well as the opportunity to volunteer. And that is an active program that we have in place.
Wonderful. I will be at your door with the list and you all can speak, but there are people who are really keen on giving back. But again, as you rightly pointed out, the hesitancy of how you will be accepted. So I really appreciate that. My last question has to do with the issue of the NCDs. This is of great concern to me when I learned of the impact, the economic cost of NCDs on the economy, on productivity, and the spillover into other areas. A family member has to stop doing what they're doing to care for you, diverting resources to deal with that. You can't put the resources to things maybe that younger members need. So I know that there has been an effort to help us do some adjusting in terms of our salt and sugar intake and so on. I also know that y'all are tasked with working with us on the front of package labeling, which is going to be very, very important in terms of that education to help Barbadians to be able to manage and regulate themselves, because that's what it is at the moment. What I wanted to know, I thought there might have been, but I've never heard it formally. Have you been working with the restaurants? Have you been working with the manufacturers? Have you been working with the fast food places to look at gradually, and I emphasize gradually, reduce some of those salt and sugar so that Barbadians don't rebel against it, but gradually their taste buds do some adjusting?
Thank you, Minister. I mentioned this earlier, that we've done the school-based one, and we now have to focus on the other areas, the non-food-based, the restaurants. Historically, the ministry has worked with the fast food, certainly with trans fats, and obviously they'll have to do it now with salt and sugar. And I'll ask Dr. Phillips, who has responsibility for NCDs, to speak to that a bit more. Because as he mentioned earlier, there is the strategic plan, and it speaks to some of these things that you're mentioning. Phillips?
Thank you, Minister. Arthur Phillips, Senior Medical Officer, NCDs. So in response to the question, yes, there is need, and we have been working with various stakeholders. Some individuals, the questioner included, would be aware of the meeting that we had on the 17th and 18th of October that looked at sugar and salt reduction and included stakeholders from across the various sectors, including manufacturers, restaurants, etc. What has come out of that is a recommendation for a mechanism that would include these stakeholders and that would manage the implementation of, or oversee the implementation of these measures. So that is part of the process going forward. That's a recommendation that we've made. The trans fat issue, Cabinet would have agreed for the elimination of trans fats from the food supply, essentially treating trans fats as a food contaminant. We are in the process of finalizing the recommendations for the regulations to support that and to manage the process for the elimination. Certainly, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade Division in particular has been a partner with us in discussing these issues, and the issue of front of package labeling is one of the issues that we've been looking at. You may be aware that there's been the idea of a regional approach to front of package labeling. However, there is not yet agreement, and it is unlikely that there will soon be agreement that supports what we want to achieve from a health perspective. So we've started discussions around the feasibility of Barbados going it alone. I know this has been a challenging issue because we generally speak about the small size of Barbados and the feasibility of us going it alone, but I believe discussions between Ministry of Health, Foreign Trade Division, as well as colleagues in Ministry of Energy and Business can look again. I know some recent discussions between our colleagues in civil society and Ministry of Business may suggest that there may be some possibilities that we have not considered in terms of navigating that. The business of gradual reduction, I think, is important. One, in terms of feasibility from the implementation side, and two, in terms of acceptability by the general public. So I think it is the way that we need to go. And as I said, the process, as we are recommending, is one that will include the stakeholders in in the oversight of it. So it is not the idea of Ministry of Health imposing on industry, but Ministry of Health partnering with industry and other stakeholders in looking out for the health of Barbados. So we certainly look forward to the continued support of the Foreign Trade Division and the other stakeholders in moving this process forward. Thank you.
A quick follow-up question would be, we have new entrepreneurs coming on board who are looking at products. When you go to AgroFest, when you go to BMA and so on, they're putting out new products for consumption and whatnot. I was wondering if any thought has been given to providing guidance to those new business people in terms of their formulations. Because I think if we can do that now before they get established in a bad habit and then have to do a reformulation, if there's any way that you could have a seminar for new producers and begin to work with them to develop and devise better formulations. And in addition to that, outside of the fats and the sugar and so on, the whole issue of healthy foods and healthy snacks, we actually need the medical input in helping people to identify how they can take products and turn them into healthy food that we can begin to consume. So I look forward to that. On the other side where I work, that's where we will collaborate on making something like that happen. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not often I get 2 bites at the cherry, so I'm very happy that I get to come around again. On this occasion, though, my questions are, I'm afraid, a bit more parochial. On the, or not, on the QEH matter, and we've heard a lot about resources, an absence of resources or posts not being filled and so on. But I do have to confess that sometimes I'm not clear on the HR approach to the staffing of the QEH. And my question is coming from a place of feedback from constituents who are sometimes on a relief basis. So they're coming in to cover for someone. And then they have this temporary employment and they go off again, and then they're waiting for a call. I know of an individual who has had that status for 12 years. Now, I know that there is a sense, or there's an extent to which people want to give people a chance at working. And so you say, well, there's a notion that you kind of want everybody to have a chance. But here's the thing about a chance when it comes to short-term employment. We as human beings establish consumption habits, right? We start to work, we start to cover our basic needs like food and shelter and utilities and so on. And then we also start to, to do other things that all of us would like to have the opportunity to be able to do. Maybe make repairs to our homes and maybe take out a small loan and that kind of thing. I'm trying to understand on behalf of my constituents and perhaps others who have this kind of status. What is the HR approach at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital when it comes to the filling of posts or when it comes to the management of employment? Because I seem to keep hearing a lot of these situations where people have this kind of insecurity in their work and they do not understand. So please help us to understand.
Thank you. I'll ask the Executive Chair to address you, and also the Director of HR, Ms. Reeves, is here.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Cattle. It's such an important question because it reflects so many, and it's been a historical challenge at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, transcending government administrations. The basic issue is that the hospital is made up of essentially two types of positions that are established in the permanent establishment, a number of posts, and then there are posts that are temporary or relieving posts. What is happening over the years as an institution, the approach has been taken not to fill all of the vacancies in the established posts, and instead rotate persons in a limited amount of vacancies. So let me give a specific example. So suppose in the orderlies department, for instance, you have 70 established posts. You will have perhaps about 65 persons who are established and appointed. If the Queen Elizabeth Hospital takes the route of filling the additional vacancies, you're going to fill those vacancies essentially with 5 persons. Over the years, what has happened is that a policy decision or a policy approach has been taken that to give the opportunity for several persons to get work, they take those 5 available positions and they essentially rotate several persons into those vacancies. You're correct. What it does is create uncertainty, instability. It is not really an ideal form of work. And essentially, because of the culture of the institution, when a person gets one of those relieving posts, and they could be in those posts for a number of years, they're not able to qualify for appointments because they're not working consistently and steadily as would happen in other areas. Most hospitals, modern hospitals, approach this situation very differently. They establish their HR needs by way of permanent full-time employment and then part-time. So they may cover evenings or weekends by way of part-time employment. So you'll hear when you talk to people overseas, all of our relatives across the globe, I work full-time, but I have a second job, part-time in this, or I'm a nurse and I'm working evenings, 2 evenings at a particular hospital, because that person is working in a category that's accepted of part-time. But what happens over time, because some of these persons develop specialized skills, they get called regularly. So a policy decision has to be taken at the board, and I would dare say at the policy level as to exactly how we're going to satisfy our HR needs at the institution. Because we could make a decision as an institution that we're going to fill the vacancies, but that in effect would remove a category of staffing of persons who are now relieving, and the number of persons who are relieving over time essentially has grown. So it is a decision that has to be taken. I actually have done an informal poll of persons who work in that category, using the same example. Would you prefer us to fill those 5 vacancies, or would you prefer to work? Many of them have said to me, because it's really become now part of our organizational culture, they fear that they won't be one of those 5 who are selected. But in this scenario, they're working, they'll get called maybe 6 or 7 months out of a year. So that's why, Honourable Member, that we are going to have to make it a policy decision as to whether or not as an institution we're going to fill all of our permanent established posts, reduce the numbers of persons who are substituting and relieving, and instead convert some of those requests into part-time or sessional or those kinds of arrangements. And I've been very, very direct with you in my answer. Susan Rees,
Director of Human Resources acting.
Thanks.
Pardon? Susan Rees, the Director of Human Resources acting. And within our HR policy, what we always look to do is to ensure that we do a bit of job sharing. That job sharing helps with a lot of persons being engaged in a particular area. Just to expand onto what the Executive Chair had responded to, we would have 5 vacancies. Instead of filling those 5 vacancies with 5 officers, we would share that with maybe 15 officers. And what we would do within that, at least 15 homes would be provided some kind of financial resources. Unfortunately, it may not be the ideal type of recruitment for persons who would want a job on a longer level. And for those persons, we do understand that it's a bit difficult. However, to engage other persons, the other five persons within that 5 vacancies, what we do, we have maybe, let's say maybe those persons, instead of working 12 months in a year, those persons will work 3 months in a year until we have some type of attrition going on where persons will exit the organization. So when persons exit the organization, then those persons will be engaged on a more continuous basis, and then you will have less persons being rotating within those positions.
Thank you for those responses. I have to tell you that I'm grateful to the Executive Chair for your response that acknowledges that this is a suboptimal situation. When a person has established consumption habits, and I'm using a fancy term that economists use, but it's really eating and drinking and paying for your light bill. When a person is able to do that for 3 months and then can no longer, where do you think they're going? They're going to the welfare department. They're going to the other agencies of government. And while it may disappear as a problem for the QEH from an HR perspective or from a development perspective, it reappears as a problem for the other agencies of government. And so I'm encouraged by the thinking that the Executive Chair has done on this to start to think, well, how do we create a part-time or sessional approach to this? Because while people may tell you, well, I prefer, in your poll, I prefer to hold on to the little pick, is because they haven't been offered anything else. And so when we measure employment in this country, and we say we are at 7% unemployment, often we are counting people that are not always working, and we are calling them employed, and they're not employed because they are otherwise depending on the services of government, the social services of government. And so that brings me to my second question. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital is a hospital in a community. And the minister is smiling, but it is a hospital in a community. And I discussed with the University of the West Indies about its community and its constituents, because all institutions have constituents that are not geographically based, but people that you have in your sphere of influence. But when I look at where the hospital is, its immediate community, its immediate residential community being Delamere Land, Bannister Land, across into Halls Road and Ellis Village, and there isn't much residential activity for Bridgetown on that end. But it brings me to the notion of how we are developing people around us. We say to the private sector all the time that as companies, you need to engage the people and the communities where you live, to engage them in whatever is the process of development, whatever is the stream of labor and labor needs and skills that you think you will need. How are we developing those people? So that when the people that you have right now in temporary work, when you tell them, okay, well, we don't need you now, is there some program to further engage or develop them in some way? Or are they then going to be waiting for the next 6-month call to come back in custodial duty or in some other type of, is there any attempt at all to be able to develop the skills and engage with the people in those areas? Because really, I mean, when I look at the scope for economic activity, for further skills engagement, right there in the community that is opposite you, there's tremendous scope. And there are people that, you know, that grow up seeing an institution in front of them all the time. They may have aspirations of working there. They may have aspirations of being otherwise involved in the life of this grand institution, but they are right there looking across the road and are not really engaged, and there's tremendous opportunity to do that. As I close the question, I will say that, you know, we have a situation now where many posts are closing, so many positions that people have held that were temporary are coming to an end. We have the ASH workers in the MTW, we have some of the COVID-related healthcare workers in the Ministry of Health. The ASH workers were on a week-on, week-off program. Other workers had been temporarily engaged. If we had taken up the opportunity on people's week off to otherwise try and upskill them as we're trying to do now, perhaps we would have had a more relevant pool of labor. And similarly, if we had taken the opportunity with this many years that the executive chair described, of these temporary people who have 3 months of work out of 12 and had otherwise engaged them in some community development activity, perhaps we would have a more ready, relevant pool of labor. So my question is, what is the effort to engage and help develop and have programs that directly benefit your immediate community?
Thank you for an excellent question. I'm going to ask the executive chair to respond to it. What I would add is that in part of the capital works that I spoke about earlier, there's provision for kiosks to be built. I assume that some of those kiosks are for people within the immediate surroundings. So I think that there's still some opportunities, but I'll ask the executive chair to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And your interests and your commitment to your constituents are laudable. And so I'm in suit, I say to you that we have changed policies over the years in our approach to training. There used to be an approach where we only trained persons at the institution that were established or permanent. It was a kind of like old civil service model. But we recognize a significant proportion of our staff at the institution are in that category of temporary relievers. And COVID, the pandemic, saw, as you would appreciate, an explosion in the number of relievers. I would say Harrison's Point, Ingrid Corey and the team there really led the way in ensuring that, let me correct, Ingrid Cattle Rowe and Dr. Corey Ford, the most honorable, really led the way in recognizing that we had to prepare and equip those workers for roles in the institution that were multifaceted. So Harrison's Point essentially led the way, and you saw teams at Harrison's Point, individuals who came in as orderlies and eventually trained to do aspects almost like pharmacy technology, client aids, client assistance. So we developed a model that started at the Harrison's Point through the leadership of those individuals. And that model also, our honorable representatives, we have brought into the Queen Elizabeth Hospital that we no longer just invest training in individuals that are appointed or established. But I would not by any stretch of the imagination want to give the impression that we're doing a fantastic job at this. We're taking baby steps. I believe that I can highlight Harrison's point because you can see concrete data where we're able to show at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, it is much more incremental and limited in some of our ancillary services and the work that we're doing in those areas. So what I would say to you, what your recommendation to us is to look more critically at this. Like your recommendation that we take on pharmacy delivery, which we credit to you in all of our talking about what we do. Once again, you're challenging us as an institution to be much more creative, much more intentional. That is what you're asking to do, is how we train these individuals and equip them to work in more than one area of the facility. So I give you assurance that it has started, the model exists, and what we have to do is do more of it at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and we take your recommendations. Minister Walcott is correct. The kiosks and other areas of work will provide opportunities for persons in the area, but we also want to look at employment and improving the employability of individuals because there are lots of opportunities at the facility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those thoughtful responses. A very quick last question that has to do with your revenue model. I'm afraid there's a bit of a QEH session here, but so we've heard, especially since COVID, kind of new approaches to being able to earn as a healthcare institution. Health is a tricky one because we are aiming to provide care as far along the spectrum as we can at the lowest costs to clients. And certainly there's an expectation that healthcare remain as low cost or as close to no cost as it can, although there is a cost. It just happens not to be borne by the Barbadian person or resident, people living here. And I recall there was a effort some time ago, or a suggestion some time ago, to be able to create an invoice, even though you're showing a zero balance, but to say this was the cost for your care. And I think that if we as Barbadians were able to see that, we would understand the cost that is involved in some of the things that we come to readily expect. But I asked about the revenue model because there are other ways to offshore user fees so that it's not your immediate Barbadian resident population that's paying, but through things like telemedicine and so on, you can earn resources offshore, so you can export those services. Is there any plan to strengthen that revenue model at the QEH or perhaps even beyond the QEH in the health sector in general?
Thank you. We are looking at telemedicine, but initially, I don't believe as a revenue generating at this point in time, it is something that we need to improve the health services, the health care. You are correct. The model for QEH is interesting financially. We depend on the consolidated fund. We now have the National Health Levy, and the QEH, although it provides a social good, it is still expected to generate revenue, and it is told that it has to generate revenue. So it is an interesting balance. We try to get some assistance philanthropically, but you can never determine the quantum of that. So it is something that I know that they have been looking at. In the wider ministry, we have been looking at the whole matter of financing healthcare services in Barbados. and it is something that will be discussed. Certainly the consultants, the international consultants, I believe, have delivered a report, and there's one where they recommend certain things and certain policy changes. Of course, this will have to be something that would have to be discussed at a government level to determine those policy changes for the Ministry of Health. But as it relates to QH, perhaps I'll ask the Executive Chair to speak a bit more on that, but it is a challenge.
Thank you. Minister, with your permission, I'd also like the finance manager to come forward, so just in case my figures are off. Our model as an institution really relies heavily on the subvention from the government of Barbados. That is supplemented next, I think it's about 75%. 75%, Adrian? Subvention? Yes, about 75% of our revenue is subvention. The other percentage comes from the health levy. And private revenue, private fees also are a significant source of our revenue. We have been placed on the commercial schedule of the Public Sector Management Act. So as Minister Walcott has said, it is expected that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital will be a revenue earner and contribute to, and I think the overarching position of the government is that state-owned enterprises, like the hospital, have to become more independent and self-sufficient in how we are able to do this. So you're correct that we are going to have to find additional sources of revenue. The areas that we're looking at are improving our billing. Right now, we bill basically persons from overseas, and many of them carry private insurance, international travel insurance. So we're making sure that we're able to correct and bring in the claims basically from those international insurers. So that is an area that you're going to be seeing an uptick over the years in terms of our revenue and our budgeting. We are also looking at the area of improving in the area of philanthropy. In financial year 2022, our philanthropy intake was in the region of about 500,000. This year, up until February 28th, yesterday, we've already raised, through philanthropy, both donations and in kind, $841. A big bulk of that were $841,000, thank you, ministers. So that's two major donations that came in ambulances. So philanthropy is going to form a significant platform for how our hospital, in fact, many hospitals around the world, help to finance and offset their the financial burden placed upon them. But you are correct. We are going to have to look at areas that we can generate revenue. The ophthalmology department has approached us and said, ophthalmology is one of those disciplines where you can stay in Barbados and through the use of telemedicine, do the examination of eyes from Barbados within the Eastern Caribbean, and some of our ophthalmologists actually work in some of those countries. So it is not beyond our imagination for us to be building into our financing the institution outreaching in this area to generate revenue, because it is a requirement and a mandate that we have, but we're carefully balancing this demand or requirement for being revenue generating with the social good that we have to provide for patients who are not able to afford it. And the cost often cross-subsidizes of our revenue generation, subsidizes what is happening in the areas where we may be under-resourced. I hope I've answered your question. I'm not sure. Okay, thank you.
That's everything from me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go to my question first, but I thought it is important that I speak to what I have recognized over many years, and I've been here on this earth for a very long time, where persons have insurance policies and they go to the hospital and get free care, whatever surgeries, whatever. And then the hospital foots that bill. The claims from the insurance, I believe, persons are doing it otherwise. And I would want to know if there is any further plan, because for years we've been hearing that persons will be billed for the services. And what is most astounding is that some of the, I would say, doctors or surgeons who are performing those services are using up critical surgery area. I'm not sure what the name is of where that will happen. While ordinary poor people sometimes have to wait for a year and longer to have personal matters done, referring to persons who may be suffering with fibroids and all that, and they're postponing and postponing. Other people come, and access is given to private persons who then do the surgeries, do whatever they have to do, and the poor people are still waiting. I want to know if the hospital has got anything in its plan now to be able to make sure that those who have insurance policies pay the money to the hospital, because when they have the surgery, they seem to be able to access the funds through the insurance, and the hospital is left out there and taxpayers are paying. I've paid taxes 54 years of my life. And I have not had anything free at the hospital, and I don't want anything free. But I'm saying they're poor people. Why isn't that policy looked at more seriously if it is not? To make sure that those who benefit by those private doctors who give surgery, who offer whatever, and then poor people are waiting for a year and 6 months and 3 years and so can't get the surgery. It really is a sad experience in my society. And poor people have a say. They're the nation builders, especially the old people, because you know that's my mantra. The old people are the ones who are suffering most, but poor people, and I have a difficulty as well, because I have a sister, otherwise, who has been to the hospital a year or so ago, and waited so many different times to have an opportunity for surgery. And then when she got in to see, what do you call the doctors in charge, the persons who would talk to, the consultants, the specialists, whatever, just whisper to her, I can do the eyes for you in my office, but it costs you $5,000 though. This society is going, and who are the persons suffering? The most vulnerable. And I'm not saying poor people like me, because I know what it's like to be poor, but so many thousands of Barbadians out there, problems with the feet, problems with the teeth, problems with the cancer, and they're not getting the services that they deserve as a result. I would like to know if the hospital authorities are doing or making any other efforts to be able to stymie what is happening there, because it is not what is expected of my society that is supposed to be a just society, reaching out and helping everybody, but in particular these poor people. I would like an answer on that if there's any, please.
Thank you, Honourable Member. You're asking about the insurance and recouping the costs, or you're speaking about people not getting surgery on time? Or is it two questions?
Well, you can call them two in one, because I have two more. I don't know how much longer I'll be in here, so...
I will ask the financial controller of the hospital to respond to the question as it relates to the insurance, and if we are recouping anything from the insurance. And after that, I'll ask Danny Gill, who was involved in some work looking at this and how we can deal with this. Mr. Hurley and then Mr. Gill.
Good afternoon, Chair. Adrian Hurley, Director of Financial Services, QEH. At the moment, we do work with the local and international insurance companies with our private patients to recoup costs of surgeries. Most patients who have insurance do allow us to assign the insurance benefits to us, to the QEH, when that surgery takes place. That is more on a private private patient case. However, for those patients coming through our A&E who have local health insurance, we are working on getting that process in place with the A&E and our medical records team so that we can access also the local insurance for those patients coming through our A&E for free care.
Thank you. Mr. Gill, I know you were doing some work on this, some research. Okay.
Danny Gill, Healthcare Finance Commissioner. For some time now, the government of Barbados has been looking at healthcare finance. And as the member rightly said, what has been happening over time is that more and more persons have been paying out of their pocket. In fact, the last survey that was done indicated that it was as high as 47% in Barbados. What this means is that when you present yourself to an institution for care, you may have to find the expenditure, and it comes direct out of your pocket. For instance, I know of a case right now in Barbados where a gentleman, the wife is sick. I think it's a type of cancer. And he has had to go to the point where he has had to sell his home. And the wife is under treatment and she's overseas. Based on this, one of the things we've been looking at is the possibility of having a national health insurance program in Barbados. And with this insurance, if it is put in place, because it has to be agreed to by the government of Barbados. One of the things that it would do is that a person now can present him or herself at an institution for a service, and that service would be covered under the national health insurance. We would have developed a paper in relation to this, and I don't know if the minister wants me to deal with this now or maybe in another session, and we had a group of international experts that came down. They looked at our paper. They have now provided us with a report, and I'm not sure if the minister wants me to talk in terms of the report.
I spoke about that today. Sorry, you don't need to go into the details of that. I said it's a matter that would now have to be considered at a different level.
Right,
Okay,
but in that too, what it would also do, if you put a national health insurance program in place, it will force the public institutions to position themselves to provide the kind of care in a timely fashion. And it would also force what are the other elements to look at efficiencies and the various other things. One of the things that we would have to look at, though, is how this program will be financed. And as I said, that is in the report. I'm not sure if that answers the member's question.
Thank you, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, sir, for your answer. I also want, Mr. Chairman, to reiterate a need for synergies in every governmental department. For what we are witnessing now, it says that everybody is in their own silo and doing their own thing. And I've had the privilege to see where we could collaboratively work together. I'm going to honor the elderly again, where thousands of Barbadians are aging and they have challenges. Housing is a big problem. But where's the housing ministry working in collaboration with the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs? The hospital, meaning health now, that is another critical area. Where is it happening? We have youth commissioners who are on the ground. they look after the youth, but their mandate, as far as I remember from the 1990s, is also to report challenges with the seniors. And that is not happening. And there's so many other agencies, even associated with over 300 social workers, I believe, in Barbados. And some are at education, some are in people empowerment, some are at health. They're all over the place, but there seems to be no meeting of ideas to see how we can dispense of the services that are available. That is an area of concern, because I am seeing where this collaborative effort could work, and we can merge the use of these humankind as well as the resources. There's mental illness, homelessness, serious drug abuse, abandonment of people, so many young people involved in challenges, mental disorders, and so where they're planning to commit suicide. So many things are happening, and there's so many policies and programs we have, but I'm not seeing things coming together. I even talk about the Albert Graham Center, where there are children up there who have educational needs, but most of the children who are in the Albert Graham Center are children of poor people who cannot afford to give them take them to get the kind of therapy and services that they require. But how are they merging with education, that their educational needs can be met? Because a child who may be challenged in that way may be so great at music and its development, or doing craft and all that. I am seeing everybody in the corner where the funds are going, and they're not reaching people in a holistic way. And I want to know, what plans are there for us to be able to get that kind of psychological support, to bring in volunteers? We have hundreds of nurses and other health personnel who have come in from England back home to live. Are we using them as volunteers? Are we drawing on our own people, young people in the community, through community development? Are we doing it through the other agencies? And unless we get that collaborative approach happening across the country, we are losing out on so much. I am appalled with those young people and others who are living over in what used to be the old Treasury building. What are we doing about that? When you call one ministry, they say not for our responsibility, it is X's ministry. And we are not getting anywhere. If we care for humankind, we can make a difference with the millions upon millions of dollars we're spending in this country every year. And this siloism has to go out, because who is suffering at the end of the day? The same sick people, the same poor people, because persons who have funds can pay for their children to go into institutions. They can send them overseas and nobody has to know they have a mental problem. But poor people's children remain here and are suffering. We need, as a government, a mature government at that, all these years of independence under our belts, to change what we are doing now to make that difference in the lives of Barbadians. And so I wish to hear from the honourable member and members and their teams here who have been working really assiduously, really, really hard. But we're still not meeting our targets. I would like to know what's happening, please, and how it can be done to change it. The substance abuse people are not involved in a lot of areas. Where are we now in this respect, please? And what are these estimates reflecting as to the way forward in this new dispensation?
Thank you, Honourable Member. You have covered quite a number of areas. Some of them we have covered already today. But I will still try to respond to all of your queries. As it relates to the silo effect, I think this is something that pervades government in Barbados. In the Ministry of Health, we've certainly been we've heard earlier, have been working with the Ministry of Education. We've had meetings, and meetings are planned with the Ministry of People's Empowerment. I'm sure that the Minister can speak to that, and there are plans for further meetings. As it relates to the Albert Graham Center, which you mentioned in passing, we recognize that we provide some aspect of care, but more holistic care is needed. And it is a discussion that we've had also with initially with the Ministry of People's Empowerment, and a meeting is to be held with the Ministry of Education. And this will all obviously fit into the plans that the Ministry of the Education has going forward. You mentioned mental health, and I thought that we have dealt quite a bit with that today. And you were clear again, I'll reiterate, They are concerned that the whole manner of dealing with mental illness in the country has to change. There needs to be a transformation in the approach to it. They need for more use of the communities and more outreach programs for meeting people in the communities. You've mentioned care of the elderly. I spoke earlier as it relates to the plans that we have for geriatric care. And in my part where I dealt with the new hospital, I spoke of the plan to have community-based care, and also we be pushing the daycare for elderly people to be brought there to interact and with other people and to evolve in skills or whatever at that facility. You mentioned also on fairness as it relates to access to health care for persons, and it was mixed up. I got the impression that you were speaking to the fact that some people can pay and get earlier dates for procedures at the hospital. I assume that's what you were speaking about. It is something that it has been happening. There's no need of denying it. It's something that we have been trying to deal with. But you would recognize that people have choices. And if someone feels that there's a waiting list for a particular procedure, and they believe that if they speak to the consultant and they offer to pay the specialist, and the specialist will facilitate them getting done earlier. It is a difficult task. It is something that the hospital has been trying to address for years. But we must understand that when we employ consultants to the hospital specialists, that they are entitled to private care. And it goes back to the fact that you said that the hospital has to be revenue generating. And when private cases come, there is revenue generation. Of course, there is a downside to that, and I know that the executive chair would know what I'm speaking about. Persons then come to the hospital and pay perhaps sometimes less than the cost of the procedure to get it done in a semi-private arrangement. And these are things that need to be dealt with. If someone is going to go to a specialist to have a procedure done and they're going to be coming to the hospital, I think we need to ensure that the hospital covers at least the consumables in that process. And that is all, of course, all of this can be wrapped up into your initial question about insurance and health insurance. I believe, Honourable Member, I've answered all of your questions and queries. Thank you.
Just one comment, Chair. I knew it before, just refresh my memory on the percentage of private to public cases. We are now seeing 75% public cases as compared to 25% private cases. So the majority of it are still, despite what the public thinks, the majority of cases we are seeing are mainly public cases.
Can I ask my final question, then, sir? Final comment?
Yes, Honourable Member.
Okay. I hope that when they come back here next year, if my life is spared, that the things we are discussing here today, some of them will be addressed, because these are long and drawn out. And I have a lot of information in my head regarding the queries I'm making now. I've had the experiences. My final one, sir. Everybody has got death in their families or in their neighborhoods. I want to find out in my short question and the final one, what are the plans for the disposal of bodies from the Queen Elizabeth Hospital morgue or any other morgue that is a private one in Barbados? The possibility of decomposition, and we hear a lot, I don't know all the truth, I know of some, is really one that has some concern, leads to concern. I know that it is costly for persons to bury their dead, especially during COVID time. The rich, the poor, the young, the old, we had deaths across the country. There were over 500. And a lot of the families just could not bury their dead, poor people in particular. And of course, the Ministry of the People Empowerment working through welfare came on board to assist. I would like to find out what comprehensive plan there is in Barbados for the disposal of those bodies and bodies of poor people whose families agree that they will want to go the route of cremation that is so much cheaper. The welfare department would have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars last year and the year before in order to help families to bury their dead. What is the plan of this government in the Ministry of Health for the disposal of those bodies that would have been there for years that families have not claimed, when we have a lot of attorneys at law who can work with families and help to guide them through the process of disposing the bodies, and when the cremation happens, give them an urn that they can hold it in memory of their dead. I would just want to put that on the table and to thank all the honourable members and the officers in the Ministry of Health for their guidance and the advice they have given to us, and the assurances to see that going forward, we can change the whole culture of what is happening that is so costly and causing us to be drained of the funds that we could dispense of them in another meaningful manner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member. You're correct. This is a long-standing problem that is going ongoing between the... You're correct. It is a long-standing problem dating back to your time and beyond that and before that. And it is a matter in which when someone died at the QEH and the next of kin could not be contacted, or no person is able to conduct the business on behalf of that person, the QEH would normally inform the welfare department to further investigate and or facilitate burial. And where the welfare department was unsuccessful in doing this, they had the responsibility of paying for this to be sorted out. Over time, this has resulted in tremendous costs to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and there have been new arrangements which have been put in place. The suggested protocols to be followed are as follows. The Welfare Department will retain responsibility for collecting from the QH morgue any body that is not claimed within 7 working days after death, keeping the body in search under their arrangements with the funeral home of their choice, and conducting the requisite assessment to establish if a next of kin will claim the body. If the Welfare Department fails to collect the body within 7 working days, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital shall simultaneously A, notify the said department of its intent to dispose the body, and B, issue public notification of its intent to dispose of the body. If in 2 weeks following the public notice, the Welfare Department's assessment concludes that the next of kin or proxy cannot be found or cannot afford burial, the QH shall so be informed, and a recommendation be made for disposal of the body via cremation arrangements. The QH Medical Records Department will ensure that verification of next of kin proxy consents to bear responsibility for the patient's body in the event of death is included in the hospital inpatient admission. So this is something that is expected to do when they're admitted. Disposal costs covering transportation, and it goes in to speak about all the other things that can occur. But the bottom line is that this is how the process will going forward if they're unclaimed. Bottom line, cremation will be done. If relatives come forward, they will pay the cost of the cremation. If not, that is it. And the QH will no longer incur the bills of hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, where you're paying one funeral home $35 per day for refrigeration, and another one for remove the body at $96 per round trip if it is between 8 and 4, and if it is between 4 and 8, $45 per day for refrigeration. If it is after night, $140 to transport it and then to refrigerate it. And these are the costs that we are paying because of unclaimed bodies. So I thank the honourable member for the question, and the matter is certainly being dealt with. Thank you. The last time I believe it was 42. The number stands at 42. We pay up to $40,000 a month.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Minister. Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, first of all, say that I would like to think that with two doctors leading the Ministry of Health and Wellness, that a number of the perennial problems that we have not only inherited, but perhaps in some ways also contributed to over the years, that they would be able to bring a laser-like approach to this ministry to address a number of the problems that have been raised here, certainly in these estimates. I start, Mr. Chairman, from a point where I'm hearing the echoes from a number of my other colleagues, particularly the member for St. Thomas, as well as the member for St. Michael South Central, addressing the issue of what I consider to be the voiceless in this country. We speak oftentimes about the poor, we talk about the most vulnerable. And in both of their presentations, they've sought to raise the issue of those persons who do not have the opportunity to go outside of Barbados in the event that they're sick. They've sought to raise the issue of the persons who are frustrated with a system that for decades has not met the basic requirements of the delivery of health care. Now, many of the persons who are in the well, I have had the opportunity to request their intervention on many occasions. They're probably tired of hearing from me asking for assistance or an intervention to be able to assist persons who feel as though the services at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in particular, or even at the Polyclinic, has not certainly been meted out in the way that they would like. And I must say that I get good responses, but I also often say to them that it should not take the minister or any minister to call and to make the interventions that sometimes we have to make in order for the delivery of health care to be fair and in many cases just to the people who deserve it most. Many people in this room, if they take sick, I'm sure some will go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, but many also have the option of going abroad. And therefore, I speak this afternoon for the ones who don't have the option of going abroad, the ones who only rely on the current healthcare system that we have across the country. And in particular for the ones that certainly I have lost over the course of the last few years. Many of you know I was diagnosed in 2018 with breast cancer. I have, on every occasion, I think that I've spoken in the estimates, raised the issue of the approach to health care, the issues that people face when they receive a diagnosis, whether cancer or otherwise, how we deal with people, how we speak to people, how we walk people through their fears, how we explain to people the type of service that needs to be delivered, how we comfort them when there is bad news to be delivered. And I am not sure that even though we have heard the cries, we have heard the pleas, that we are yet in a place where we have been able to address the simple things that can make a difference between someone who is scared as hell about what they're about to experience, or someone who is having, for instance, to go to A&E and having to wait long hours without sometimes being seen, and unsure as to what is going to happen to them. I had a young man yesterday who went to the hospital. I think he went in about 1 o'clock. He was never admitted to a ward until about 6 o'clock this morning. Now, while the argument could be that there was a time when it was probably 3 days he might have to wait before he actually got a bed, I want to say to this chamber that it was still an inordinately long time before that person could be seen. And therefore, my questions are a bit mixed, because I really do feel that the minister and his team perhaps need to address themselves to the issues of whether we are actually fit for purpose. Are we delivering in the way that we ought to, particularly for the most vulnerable in this country? As it relates to whether it is cancer or whether it is diabetes, are we taking the steps to be able to walk people through process? Are we doing it in a humane way so people feel that the persons on the other end of the line understand what they are going through? And what efforts are being made presently by the team to be able to work on that patient advocacy, that patient intervention, and even use some of the technologies that were used during COVID, because sometimes it seems as though we forget that COVID existed and we had to do things differently. But things like telehealth, are we using these mechanisms that became kind of par for the course during COVID to strengthen our ability to speak to the patients, to reassure them, and to certainly deliver the best health care that we can? That's the first question.
Thank you, Honourable Member. A lot of what you said, we are in agreement with, and we've said so at various times during the course of the day. As it relates to the A&E, I think we've been through that twice already, in terms of recognizing that there are issues there. I myself went through and spoke about the flow part, the patient flow and the issues that need to be addressed. We spoke of the need for the refurbishment. If you're looking, is saying that we cannot wave a magic wand and everything will be solved overnight. It is not going to happen like that. We didn't get there overnight, and we are not going to get out of it overnight. A lot of heavy lifting has to be done. The staff is committed. They recognize there are a number of deficiencies, and there are some areas where we do well. It's not all criticism. But as I said earlier, there are a number of issues to address. We have to deal with the expansion, which is long overdue. We promised this over, is almost 2 years now, I believe, and that hasn't been done. We're looking at the matters of, in the short term, we spoke earlier, so dealing with the elderly for care, how we've had some success with that in getting those people out of accident and emergency. We've admitted the issues with the triage and the patient flow thereafter, and the issues that occurred there and how we plan to improve them. The referral where persons are often seen and have to wait for long periods of time to get results or to get x-rays done because the refurbishment is incomplete. You can't get x-rays in any, you have to then go to the journal, up to the main radiology center to have those, and those things could cause delays. Then sometimes after you've gotten the results and you've gotten the x-rays, then there's a referral, a process of referral to whichever specialty might be necessary. And then you have to wait for the person who you're referring the person to come to see the person, to assess the person. Sometimes they come and decide that this is not medicine, this might be surgery, this is not surgery, this might be gynecological. All of those things happen. And they're not unique to Barbados, but you need to have certain protocols in place. And this is something that I believe the A&E has accepts that they need to put protocols in place. We need to address the patient flow. The triage system works well most times, but needs to be improved. We've spoken obviously of the need to equipment. That is sometimes an issue. And we're working on that with the CapEx that I spoke about earlier. Communication, vital. I believe Dr. Williams spoke about it. And we, in response to a question from the other honourable member earlier today, that the issue of patients just needing and relatives needing to know what is happening, what is going on, why am I here sitting down still, things like this. Of course, you will have people who believe that once they go to A&E, that they must be seen right away. And we went through that as it relates to the triage system and how we deal with that. And that, unfortunately, the majority of people fall into category 3 and 4, which is not urgent and which is not necessarily life-threatening. That is the reality. People who are in category 1 and 2, who are in critical state or extremely serious conditions, tend to be seen and to be dealt with more swiftly than the others. And that is the reality wherever you go. But there are things to be done, and we recognize that. And I can say that we are working assiduously towards that in the estimates. I spoke about the CapEx to deal with the equipment. I spoke about the refurbishment and completion of the expansion. And I didn't mention earlier about the increasing, we were going to get some increasing numbers of staff to help with the situation. There's a matter of the cardiac care unit for chest pain, people with chest pain who we suspect to have heart attacks, where we're going to set up a chest pain unit within the A&E stabilize people who will then be transferred to the cardiac suite for treatment. We spoke about the expansion of the MICU, so that persons will, so oftentimes we have persons who are on monitors, who are ventilated, staying in the staff room and occupying space because there's no space on the medical floors. And of course, then there's the issue of congestion on those medical floors, primarily, where they're overcrowded, again, from some of the issues, not necessarily only because of elderly for care, but because of patients who, have long-standing chronic issues, have difficulty in controlling their heart failure or whatever, indeed sometimes their diabetes. So these are all of the myriad factors that play. We admit that the accident emergency department should be doing much better. And the efforts are there to ensure that this happens. But we're just asking to bear with us. Thank you.
While I appreciate, Minister, the expenditure on capital expenditure, I mean, the truth is that during COVID in particular, the QEH, and certainly Ministry of Health, has received significant amounts of financing to be able to help us through that very difficult period. I don't think you answered the question as it relates to the human resources in terms of, because you can spend all this money, you can expand the A&E as we've seen, you can build out all of the facilities, but if we are not dealing with people, and I think the member for St. Michael South Central raised the issue, you have a lot of disgruntled people who are within the hospital, who because of the overworking, because of the lack of equipment, they are frustrated. And I am just curious whether, I haven't heard mention of a strategic plan perhaps as to what the hospital focuses on. I think we accept you can't do everything because we just don't have the resources to do it. But as the Prime Minister often says, who is coming to work to make sure that the international partnerships are taking place, that the NGO collaborations locally are being, strategically aligned on a regular basis because we recognize we can't do everything? Are we going after institutions outside of these shores to make sure that those services that perhaps they have excelled in, that they can now be transferred in terms of knowledge to the island? Because without that strategy, the poor people, the most vulnerable in this society, are the ones who will continue to make the calls and express their frustration about the long waits, the attitudes of people when they speak to them, and the inadequacy of perhaps the bed availability and those types of things. So I think the strategy is perhaps what I'm trying to get a sense of. We can, again, build all of the buildings, but if we are not dealing with our people, I think it was the CEO who mentioned earlier that the model that is currently being used in order to be able to employ persons is fundamentally flawed to some extent. If we are trying to modernize the hospital, then I believe that deconstructing the existing way in which we fill positions for the hospital has to be one of the first things that we start to look at. What does a modern QEH and Polyclinic structure require in order to function? And perhaps those conversations need to be had a little higher, because obviously all of us across all of the agencies have to deal with conversations of rights of workers and labor and with unions. But I think these are conversations that the country needs to have, and perhaps in this discussion in the well need to take more center stage. I'm not here to pat the Barbados Labour Party, this administration, on its back. I deal with real issues on a day-to-day basis where people have challenges getting access to services. And I do feel that rather than us constantly coming here and talking about all the problems within healthcare, that we do need to put the issues of health financing on the table and the various models that are available. We need to get to a point where we look at the delivery of patient care, we look at the strategy. What will the hospital focus on and what will it outsource? And are we getting those persons to sit down and really pull it apart and to try to figure out what we prioritize?
Thank you. As it relates to A&E, that's where you started, we've also had the input of the Northwell Group, and they've made certain recommendations in relation to patient communication, behavioral change, and these are things that obviously the hospital will have to address. I mentioned earlier when I spoke earlier today about the improving nursing communication and things like this that needs to be addressed, and that we were going to implement a training process to deal with that. I think we also have to be mindful that in the hospital, it is a part of Barbadian society. And society is not what it was 30, 40 years ago. This is a society that we approach each other differently. And how we relate to each other is different. And the staff of the staff, like anywhere else, come out of this society. Okay? And so it is a process. If you want to bring about change in attitude and how they relate and interact with each other, with their fellow men, then that is a process. It is something that we recognize within the QH that has to be addressed. I know that the executive chair can speak to it, but I know that they have made overtures and made plans as to how they're going to address this. So they see it as being very important. Relating to health finance, as was said earlier by me today and then by Mr. Gill, the consultants came in, they've met with our people, and there are certain recommendations and proposals which, will be discussed and have to be discussed within the ministry and certainly within the cabinet of the Barbados. That has to be done. It is not something that is, the consultants have made recommendations. It is not so, it is not that we must follow everything that the consultants recommend. And we are looking at the matter of healthcare financing. This is, as I mentioned, is one of the issues that we have to address when I started. So I take your point, I understand. I don't see it as beaten up on us. I believe that all of us have the same concerns as we relate to the poor and ordinary people within Barbados. I don't think it is. I think we all see this. All of us, I believe, come from humble backgrounds. I believe I'm looking around. I know some in front of me might not have been in this, but I'm looking around. And I think we feel it. I feel it because I work in the health system in Barbados for several years. I know that things happened then, and it was different. The matter that I'm speaking about of operating theaters running for 10 hours a day was standard. We enjoyed it. We did it. But that has changed. And of course, that was decades ago. Things have changed. And I think we need to get back to that focus, that mindset. I'm going to ask the executive chair to speak to it a bit, because I know that this is something that they have been engaging in the meetings of the executive directors.
Yeah. Dr. Christine Greenwich, Chief Operations Officer, and thank you so much for highlighting some of the challenges that we face. In terms of a strategic plan, part of the feedback and observations in general when it comes to the AED is for us to identify what standard work ought to be in the AED. Standard work is a process where, regardless of resources, we have put in place certain standards that we intend to keep. Most of the complaints from any ER AED stems around two main principles. One is communication between the healthcare team, our patients and their families. And the other very important thing is the waiting times, complaints around waiting times. So in the A&D, last year we did something called a huddle. We implemented a huddle. A huddle is just that we stop what we're doing, assess the current situation, look at actual and/or potential crises that we will have to face in terms of urgency. It's a technique that comes out of another concept called team steps. We are now about to send 9 of our across the facility to Norfolk to be trained in a tactic called team steps, which stems from, again, communication with patients and also team members be on the same page, right? So we for example, the AED, we can't have 3 different titles doing the same work. It is redundant, it's a time waster, and it's taken away from the ability to keep our current assessment of the volume in the A&D current. Another issue in terms of improvement strategy is the whole process of triaging, which is someone coming into our facility and the quality of it. Studies have shown that if we can put 2 nurses there consistently, or even 1 nurse, 1 physician consistently at standard work, that the process of the throughput and any other bottlenecks that may come up during the course of a patient experience is better facilitated. So the team in A&D, I think, are on a very good improvement process in looking at those 2 main things. It's not 100 things, but if you don't talk to patients, let them know that what is going on, or speak that grandma is okay. Or, you know, one strategy at my place we did during COVID, a simple cell phone. Everybody has one of these pretty much. Even grandma have them. A simple call for face-to-face with someone on the outside of the A&E, being able to see the loved one and have a conversation just by utilizing a tablet or FaceTiming in terms of reducing that stress. So I think that there are things that are not cost-related, simple things that we can do to improve and or enhance the experience of our patients. So I really have to say that the team have identified those things are very much. Another thing that maybe the DMS can mention, we figured that people are very sensitive to colors. You know, so something like an armband in the A&E using the stoplight technique of yellow, red, and green. Identify right away, you know, my reds are my very critical patients. The yellow are moderate, and the greens are ones that really should leave, see and treat. So, you know, we're implementing that, rezoning location of the criticality or the critical level of that patient so that the staff can see better. You know, we're very compressed because of space, but there are visual things that we can do to enhance that experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, you asked a fundamental question about whether or not we were thinking strategically about what it was going to take to make the Queen Elizabeth Hospital fit for purpose. Just going back to your original question, how can it meet the needs of Barbadians and respond to the kinds of complaints? Well, we recognize we are at the end of our strategic planning period and about to embark on another 3-year strategic cycle. And already we've had the opportunity of Oliver Jordan and Tracy, a group looking at state-owned enterprise reform. And this was an initiative out of the Ministry of Finance, which looked at what we were doing financially. We've had Northwell come in and do a deep dive. And we've had our own efforts through accreditation at looking at how we fared in meeting global and international standards. And it's really come down to 5 things that we believe will fundamentally transform the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, that we have to focus our energy and investments in, and are reflected in the estimates here today, or our borrowing portfolio. The first thing is investing in our human resources. We've talked about it, around it so many times this afternoon. If we do not invest in human resources, creating the number of new subspecialties in oncology, in medicine, we've just introduced a vascular surgeon. We've just brought back in a hepatobiliary and oncology surgeon. But in many instances in Barbados, we have 1 cardiothoracic surgeon. We have 1 or 2 neurosurgeons. And we are expecting with these numbers, these critical small numbers, to respond to the population needs. And it is extremely difficult, and hence the waiting lists. For instance, our Dr. Mo, who is doing pacemakers, he has a waiting list of 45 persons. Today, March 1st, is the first time since 2017 that the people of Barbados are going to benefit from a cardiac suite being open for 24 hours. This is a major milestone for Barbados. It comes out of the It comes out of the initiatives of the cardiology project. Our Prime Minister would have had engagement with regional cardiologists, which highlighted where we were in cardiology programming, and we have really had the wind in our back from the leadership at the most senior level of this government to push forward. So human resource development, human resource capacity is going to be key to our ability to respond. We have to get more people, more subspecialists in nursing and in medicine. We also have to do more in terms of providing the staffing that's required to run the hospital over 24 hours. That we don't have. Our housekeeping services end at 9 p.m. So therefore, it's only the accident and emergency that has 24-hour housekeeping. So these are the kinds of issues that we have. We still are not a 24-hour functioning hospital. So the last thing under HR development also is around communication and how we communicate. Our Prime Minister recently challenged us and she said, you know, why are you bringing people in to communicate when communication is fundamental to what nurses and doctors should be doing? So unless we invest, and that's why our Team STEP initiative, the team that are going off on April the 15th, Team STEPS is the state-of-the-art approach that hospitals across the globe are using to encourage a culture of communication and transparency across the organization, paired with a concept called a just culture, which is encouraging people, we are starting at the hospital, to really report errors, near misses, to be open and transparent so that we do not have people really hiding and dodging when errors are made. The second thing that's going to transform strategically the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is technology, both in terms of information systems and medical technology. We have to be able, our CapEx plan, our 5-year plan, which we would have developed over the past year and a half, now give us a full repository of what is needed in every single discipline, Honourable Prime Minister, from oncology to cardiology to radiology. What does it need to bring the hospital to first world standard? We're no longer guessing about it. We know exactly what is required. It's approximately $135 million, $45 million in the first year. So we have that drilled down. This is significant investment that we have to be aware of. The third thing that's going to be sustainable financing. The introduction of the health levy. The people in the Ministry of Finance who conceptualized that we needed an earmark fund to be directed into health systems was perhaps one of the most significant and innovative interventions that were made in the first 3 months of this administration. And that health levy has performed remarkably, and it is now increasing and performing beyond our expectations. And finally, sustainable finances, that being important, paired with reducing costs and finding efficiencies, which we know all the areas. The Minister Walcott highlighted our dead body phenomena. And lastly, because I know my time is not unlimited, engaging better with patients. We recognize sometimes people fundamentally do not understand if they're in the public place, if they're in this private space. So we are working actively of having patients involved and working with civil society. Treatment doesn't just end, and I know you know this, Deputy Prime Minister, with a clinical intervention. Care and support is equally important. So we have an MOU with Cancer Support Services that started out just focused on cancer patients, that now we're rolling across the hospital to ensure that all of our nurses, physicians have the ability to deal empathetically with people and the situations that are encountering. So I'll stop there because I recognize my time is limited, but I wanted to say to you and give you the assurance, Deputy Prime Minister, that we are very, very clear on what is required, the level of investment that is needed, and we know as an institution that we have the support of the government to achieve the goals that we've set.
I I want to thank you. I'm getting a message in my ear as to ask you when you were starting the 24-hour program.
The
24-hour program across the hospital. The negotiations.
Yeah,
that we
staffing,
spoke about,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, it's a staffing issue. Yeah, it's mainly a staffing issue and a costing issue. Yeah, we will discuss it with the Ministry of Civil Service.
No, and the unions.
And the unions, yes.
Prime Minister is cutting into my time, Mr. Chairman. I just want the
Yes.
House to be aware. So I'm asking her questions, but she will have her time shortly to intervene. I thank you for the clarity in relation to what the hospital is doing. I think it is very important to take the time to walk the country through what the challenges are, but also that, the hospital is not standing still, that there are things happening. I think we just have to make sure that we connect the dots and we allow people to still feel while we are doing all the strategizing, allow people to feel as though changes are happening. Okay, I don't think the public is unreasonable. You touched on, and I'll lead into my last question, you touched on the issue of cancer support services. Now, for the last few years, we've heard about the cancer plan. I know the former, Lieutenant Colonel Bostic would have been leading the charge on that at one point. I am just curious, where are we with the cancer plan? And of course, I take, this is very near and dear to my heart. As I said earlier, I've lost a lot of people since my own discovery of cancer. A lot of people who I believe, if they'd had the right intervention from an early stage, perhaps could have had a different outcome. A number of people who did not have the opportunity to undergo genetic testing. They didn't have the opportunity to undergo a PET scan. It is very expensive. It's not even available here on island. I know that there are some plans through the private sector to be able to provide that, but I'm simply asking the question, what is the hope that can be given to the next generation of persons who may be diagnosed with cancer, that if they can feel comfortable that something is on the horizon, as opposed to feeling as though the only way that they might get a few extra years is if they leave Barbados for treatment. I think we need to really address this because there are too many, just like diabetes, we're having a number of people who are not getting the intervention from an early stage in terms of early detection, and then by the time the results are known, they're at stage 4, which is end of life, and therefore they're not able then to be able to have any interventions to save their lives. So just if you can speak to the cancer plan.
I'm going to ask Dr. Phillips to speak first, the cancer plan, and then I will speak perhaps definitively to some of the things that you've raised.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Thanks. The deliverables for the cancer plan have been folded into the NCD plan, but I think it's important for us to talk about what the cancer plan comprises of and how we are delivering on this. So the cancer plan includes the issues we've been discussing, public education, guidelines and protocols, clinical pathways, continuing professional education, integration of palliative care, and of course, management of data, making sure we have research and monitoring and evaluation. In terms of the preventive component, certainly we make the point that over 40% of cancers are preventable with the basic NCD interventions, the nutrition, physical activity, avoiding tobacco, and reducing harmful use of alcohol. Additionally, the issues around early detection are important. There are many of our cancers, certainly our top cancers, are preventable in large measure. When we talk about colorectal cancer, this is common in both men and women, and through simple or relatively simple measures, we can do screening of stool samples and prioritize individuals that need to have further investigations, including colonoscopies, where polyps can be removed, and early stage growths can be identified for surgery. In terms of our cervical cancers, which are an important component of the cancers in women, we have our program in terms of pap smears and the guidance in terms of the frequency and the management of different types of abnormalities. We also have our HPV vaccination program, which offers boys and girls an improved chance of clearing aggressive HPV types, which we are exposed to through sexual activity, and which put us at risk for development of abnormal lesions and cancers. So the HPV program within Ministry of Health is a key component of our cancer prevention efforts. In terms of breast cancer, that's the next area where we are commissioning a guideline in terms of screening, and we need to support that with a call-recall system. What we do not want is a situation where only those who are most concerned or those who are presenting late are the ones who are seen. We want a system where we don't have over-screening of a particular group and then nothing happening for others. So a call-recall system where individuals are reminded, where they're prompted to have their screening tests done, will be an important component of the cancer prevention effort as well. So we've just completed the draft of our colorectal cancer screening guideline, and we're moving on to the prostate and breast cancer, which are common in men and women. In terms of the palliative care component, this is going to continue to be important because there are a number of individuals across the NCDs, but particularly individuals with cancer who, as they face life-threatening illnesses, will benefit from palliative care support. So palliative care, not just the hospice component, but palliative care in all of its elements, supporting the social, the spiritual, the financial, etc., as well as dealing with symptoms and intervening in areas where there can be improvement in terms of clinical features. That continues to be important. Ministry of Health certainly is supportive of the efforts in the private sector and the NGO community of developing facility-based hospice care. There's also community-based palliative care as well. And we believe that this is going to continue to be important because there is an element of care that is often not best delivered in a hospital setting, but needs to be delivered because individuals should have the comprehensive package of care to deal with the features that they see in terms of end-of-life care. I believe the speaker is my time up?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Honourable Member, I believe that you also wanted to get into the actual processes for investigation and treatment, the whole matter of genetic markers, genomic sequencing, genetic sequencing, the issues of treatment, targeted treatment, linear accelerated treatment, PET scanners to determine if there are metastases present. If you want me to say, you said for 12 persons in the next 10 years, certainly I would say that before then, we should be in a position to offer these services. You alluded to the fact that the private sector, there's some interest in linear accelerators and indeed PET scanners. So we have not included it, obviously, in the CapEx for reasons of size and population. And if we really need to have 2 or 3 linear accelerators in a country this size and a population this size, unless, of course, we're going to be marketing it to services to the Eastern Caribbean. As it relates to that, we've known about the Best of Santos lab and how well it has done. And in this financial year, I believe we're going to start in this financial year, the refurbishment to start the Barbados Living Lab project. And this is something that will work in a cluster of innovation with the Best of Santos Lab. In the first phase, we're going to be looking at the incorporation and utilization of genomics and research on NCDs and cancers and some infectious diseases. We'll be looking to do this with the recruitment of graduate students, and indeed, we will obviously have to hire some research-oriented and dedicated scientists. And this mission, coming out of this, will come the whole process of genetic markers and genetic sequencing and that within Barbados. And this mission is to establish a unique modular laboratory with both iterative and scientific research and innovation as core drivers. And obviously to help to create the sustainable bioeconomy that we have been speaking about in Barbados. So as it relates to the person with cancer in the future, the next 5 to 10 years, I will say that all of these things, these services should be available within these shores. Thank you.
I look forward to that, Minister, and to the team, and I hope that you guys can continue to do the good work that you're doing. I know it's very difficult, but I am encouraged still by some of the things that I've heard. And I certainly, while I call often, I certainly will convey some of what is happening to those who I interface with who are concerned about the delivery of healthcare. With that, Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House for 5 minutes to 17 past the hour.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended for 5 minutes. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended for 5 minutes.